The American camp doctor lifts the girl's left arm and feels something wrong immediately. The bone underneath her pale skin is not solid. It shifts slightly under his fingertips, like a branch rotted from the inside. She does not scream, does not pull away, just stares at the ceiling with eyes that have already seen too much. The nurse beside him takes a half step back when the smell reaches her. Faint but unmistakable, the sweet rot of infection that has been growing for months. The doctor writes one word on his clipboard in careful block letters: osteomyelitis. But that diagnosis is only the beginning of what this medical exam will reveal about the 19-year-old German prisoner of war who just arrived at the camp in upstate New York in the spring of 1945. We are at Camp Upton, New York in April 1945. The war in Europe is collapsing like a house with its foundation kicked out. Thousands of German prisoners of war are being processed through American camps every week, a flood of grey uniforms and hollow faces. But today something unusual happens at the intake barracks. A transport truck arrives from the processing station at Fort Dix, New Jersey, carrying 32 prisoners. 31 of them are men, their faces showing the particular exhaustion of soldiers who have already lost. The 32nd is a girl who looks no older than 17, though her paperwork says she is 19. Her name is listed as Liesel Brenner, captured in the Ruhr Pocket in western Germany 3 weeks earlier. She wears a dirty Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform, 2 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. The fabric hangs on her frame like a tent on a thin pole. The guards notice immediately that she holds her left arm close to her body, never letting it swing naturally. When she walks, that arm stays locked against her ribs like something she is protecting or something that is protecting her. The intake officer, a sergeant from Minnesota who has processed thousands of prisoners in the past 6 months, asks her to extend both arms for inspection. Standard procedure: check for weapons, contraband, hidden items. Liesel hesitates. Her eyes move from the sergeant to the door, calculating something. Then she lifts her left arm slowly, the way a person might lift a broken wing. The sergeant sees the swelling just above her wrist, a dark bulge pushing against the skin like something trying to break free from the inside. The skin over it is mottled, discolored, stretched tight. He has seen infected wounds before, plenty of them, but there is something about this one that makes his stomach turn. The wrongness of it, the way it looks like the arm is being eaten from within. He calls for the camp medic immediately. The medic is a corporal from Ohio who has seen plenty of wounded soldiers in his 18 months at Camp Upton. He has treated frostbite, dysentery, knife wounds from fights between prisoners, even a case of tuberculosis that nearly shut down an entire barracks. But he has never processed a female German prisoner of war before. The women, when they come through at all, are usually nurses or clerks captured in North Africa or Italy. Factory workers from German soil are rare. He approaches Liesel and asks her in broken German if the arm hurts. His accent is terrible, the words mangled, but Liesel answers in clear English, her voice flat and precise. "It has hurt for a long time." The medic stops, stares at her. A 19-year-old German factory girl who speaks English like she learned it in school, not from soldiers. He writes a note on his intake form and sends her directly to the camp hospital, bypassing the standard quarantine barracks where new arrivals are held for observation. Something about the way she holds that arm, the way the smell reaches him even from 3 feet away, tells him this is not a fresh injury. This is something that has been growing, festering, spreading for months. We are now inside the camp hospital, a long wooden building with 20 beds arranged in 2 rows and a small examination room at the far end. The building still smells of fresh pine and disinfectant, relatively new construction from when the camp was expanded last year. Sunlight comes through the windows in clean geometric patterns falling across the white sheets of the beds. The camp doctor, Captain Edmund Kirby, is a surgeon from Boston who served in North Africa before being reassigned to prisoner of war medical duty stateside. He is 38 years old with the kind of face that looks older than it is, lines carved deep from too many hours under surgical lights. He has treated shrapnel wounds that turned men inside out, frostbite that turned feet black, and dead dysentery that emptied soldiers until there was nothing left, and tuberculosis that filled lungs with blood. In the past 2 years at Camp Upton, he has seen almost everything a human body can survive and everything it cannot. But when Liesl Brenner is brought into his examination room by 2 female nurses borrowed from the nearby civilian hospital, he knows immediately that this case is different. The nurses are Florence Whitmore and Margaret Devlin, both women in their early 30s who volunteered to help with female prisoners when the camp started receiving them last fall. Florence is tall and thin, with red hair pulled back in a tight bun. Margaret is shorter, rounder, with kind eyes and hands that have changed 1,000 bandages. They have seen their share of misery working in the civilian hospital during the war years, but nothing quite prepares them for what they are about to witness. Captain Kirby asks Liesl to sit on the examination table and remove the jacket of her uniform. She does so without protest, without hesitation, without any expression at all. It is the blankness of her face that strikes Kirby first. Not fear, not pain, not even resignation. Just nothing. Like she has learned to turn off whatever part of the brain processes emotion. Under the jacket, she wears a thin cotton shirt, once white, but now stained yellow, under the left arm. The stain spreads from the armpit down toward the elbow, a map of something spreading beneath the surface. The smell is stronger now, no longer faint. A sickly sweet odor that fills the small examination room like a physical presence. Florence opens a window without being asked. Kirby gently rolls up the sleeve of Liesl's shirt and examines the swelling. The skin over her forearm is discolored, mottled red and purple, like a bruise that has been there so long it has started to turn other colors. The swelling is not uniform. It bulges in places, creates valleys in others, like the landscape of something organic and wrong growing beneath. When he presses lightly near the wrist, a small amount of fluid seeps from a pinprick opening in the skin. The fluid is yellowish thick, the consistency of something that should not be coming out of a human body. Kirby steps back, takes a breath through his mouth instead of his nose. Then he asks Liesl how long the arm has been like this. She answers in that same flat, precise English, her German accent thick, but her words chosen carefully. 6 months, maybe 7. It started as a bruise after a fall, then it became hard, then it began to smell. 6 months. Kirby exchanges a glance with Florence and Margaret. 6 months of untreated bone infection means the damage inside could be catastrophic. Bone infections do not wait politely. They eat, they spread, they destroy everything in their path. 6 months is an eternity for something like this. He orders an X-ray immediately. The camp has a portable machine, old and temperamental, and the images often come out blurry. But he needs to see what is happening inside that arm. He needs to know if there is anything left to save. We are now in the cramped radiography room next to the hospital ward, 20 minutes after the initial examination. The room is barely larger than a closet, with the X-ray machine taking up most of the space. The walls are lined with lead sheeting, and there is a single overhead bulb that casts harsh shadows across everything. The X-ray technician is a medic with 3 months of training, a farm boy from Iowa who learned to operate the machine by reading the manual and making mistakes on cadavers. He positions Liesl's arm on the film plate, adjusting it carefully to get the right angle. The machine hums and clicks, a sound like insects in the walls. Liesl does not move. Her face remains blank, staring at nothing, as if she has learned to shut down all sensation to survive what comes next. The technician has seen this before in prisoners, this ability to disappear inside themselves. It is a skill you learn when you have no control over what happens to your body. The technician develops the film in the darkroom, a process that takes 10 minutes of careful work in complete darkness. When he brings it out, the film is still wet, chemicals dripping from the edges. He clips it to the light box on the wall and steps back. Captain Kirby studies the X-ray in silence for a full minute. Florence and Margaret lean in to see their faces illuminated by the backlight. What they see is not a clean fracture or a simple infection. What they see is destruction. The bone in Liesl's forearm, the radius has been eaten away from the inside. Where there should be solid bone, dense and white on the X-ray, there are pockets of shadow, hollow spaces where the infection has destroyed the marrow and the internal structure. The cortex, the outer shell of the bone, is paper-thin in some places and completely gone in others. It looks like termite damage in wood channels and voids spreading through what should be solid. But that is not what shocks Captain Kirby. What shocks him is the pattern of the damage. Osteomyelitis bone infection usually starts at one site and spreads outward in a predictable way. You can trace it, follow the path of destruction from the point of origin. But this infection has multiple sites scattered along the length of the radius, like someone planted seeds of rot at different points along the bone. Kirby has seen this pattern only once before in a case study from a medical journal about untreated war injuries. The pattern suggests the infection started not from a single injury, a single moment of trauma, but from repeated trauma to the same bone over an extended period. Again and again and again, the bone taking damage, trying to heal, taking more damage before the healing could complete. Until finally the body's defenses collapsed and the infection took hold in multiple places at once. He looks at Liesel and asks her a question he already knows she will not want to answer. "What kind of work were you doing before you were captured?" We are still in the hospital examination room, but now the mood has shifted. Captain Kirby is no longer just a doctor treating an infection. He is trying to understand how a 19-year-old girl ended up with an injury pattern that suggests months of forced labor under conditions so brutal that her body began to break down from the inside. Liesel sits on the examination table with her arm resting on a towel, staring at the floor. The white tiles are clean, recently mopped, reflecting the overhead light in dull patches. She does not answer immediately. Her eyes move from the floor to the two nurses, then to the door, as if calculating whether she can leave, whether she has any choice in what happens next. Finally, she speaks. "Factory work, building parts for airplanes." Her voice is still flat, still precise, but there is something underneath it now. Not fear exactly, something older and heavier than fear. Kirby asks what kind of parts. Small components, metal fittings that had to be hammered and filed by hand. She says this like she is reading from a report, like the words have been said so many times they have lost all meaning. Kirby asks if she was working in a German military factory. Liesel shakes her head, a small movement. Converted textile mill near Essen, in the Ruhr industrial region. Essen, the Ruhr. Kirby knows those names. Everyone knows those names. The industrial heart of Germany, the place where the war machine was built and rebuilt, even as Allied bombers tried to tear it apart. Factories running 24 hours a day, fed by forced labor, conscripted workers, anyone who could hold a tool. The work was 12 hours a day. Liesel continues, her voice still flat. Sometimes 14. The tools were heavy. The benches were hard. If you slowed down, the supervisors hit you. She says this last part with no particular emphasis, like she is describing the weather. If you slowed down, they hit you. A fact of life as certain as gravity. Kirby writes this down carefully in his notes. He asks if Liesel was a volunteer worker or if she was conscripted. Liesel laughs. It is a short, bitter sound like a cough that tried to be something else. She says, "No one volunteers for that kind of work." Then she tells him. The words come out in a steady stream, still in that flat, precise voice, like she is reporting facts that happened to someone else. She was assigned to the factory in late 1943 when she turned 17. It was not a choice. It was not patriotic duty. It was survival. Her family needed the ration cards that came with factory employment. Without those cards, they would starve. It was that simple. Her father had been killed on the Eastern Front. The telegram came in 1942, the year Liesel turned 16. The telegram did not say how he died, only that he had died in service to the Reich. Her mother was sick, something with her lungs that made her cough until she could not stand. Her younger brother was too young to work, barely 14. So Liesel went to the factory. She stayed there for 16 months from late 1943 until the British and American forces overran the Ruhr pocket in March 1945. 16 months of 12-hour days, sometimes 14, sometimes 16 when production quotas had to be met. 16 months of hammering metal fittings, filing rough edges, assembling components whose purpose she never fully understood. Airplane parts, they said. For fighters or bombers or transport planes, she did not know. Kirby asks about the injury again. He needs to understand the timeline, needs to know how this infection started and why it was allowed to progress for so long. Liesel explains that she fell on the factory floor in October 1944. It was not a dramatic fall, not from a great height. She simply lost her balance on the oil-slicked concrete and landed hard on her left arm. The pain was immediate, sharp and hot, running from her wrist to her elbow like electricity. She reported it to the factory nurse, a woman who worked in a small office near the main entrance. The nurse looked at the arm, saw the swelling, and gave Liesel a bandage. Told her to wrap it tight and return to work. There was no x-ray, no doctor, no time off to rest and heal. The factory kept running and the workers kept working, and if you stopped working, you lost your ration cards. Within 2 weeks, the bruise turned into a hard lump beneath the skin. Within a month, the lump began to throb with its own heartbeat. By January 1945, the arm was swollen and leaking fluid through the skin, but the factory kept running and Liesel kept working. She kept working because stopping meant losing the ration cards, and losing the ration cards meant her family would starve. Her mother was already sick, already dying, though Liesel did not know it at the time. The pneumonia that would kill her in the winter of 1944 was already in her lungs, already stealing her breath. And her brother, young Franz, he was still at home, still too young for the factories or the army or the Volkssturm. Someone had to keep the ration cards coming. Someone had to keep the family alive. So Liesel worked with a rotting arm, worked until the smell became so bad that the other girls moved away from her workbench, worked until the pain was so constant she stopped noticing it worked, until the day the Allied forces came and the factory fell silent for the first time in years. We are now 45 minutes after the initial examination, and Captain Kirby has ordered blood tests and a more detailed physical examination. What he discovers next is what truly shocks the medical staff at Camp Upton. The bone infection in Liesel's left arm is not the only injury she is carrying. When the nurses help her remove her shirt completely for the full examination, they see bruises up and down her ribs. Some are old, faded to a sickly yellow like old paper. Others are newer, still purple and tender to the touch. The bruises form a pattern concentrated on the left side where the ribs curve around toward the back. Her back has a series of scars, thin and straight, running parallel across her shoulder blades. The scars are old, years old, the kind left by a belt or a rod swung with force and precision. These are not factory injuries. These are from before. Her right hand has 2 fingers that do not bend properly. The middle and ring fingers curve slightly to the left, frozen in that position. When Kirby asks her to make a fist, the fingers do not fully close. They had been broken and healed without being set, the bones knitting back together crooked. Captain Kirby asks Liesel to explain each injury. He needs to document everything, needs to understand the full scope of what has happened to this girl's body. She does so in the same flat tone as if reciting a grocery list. The rib bruises came from being shoved against the workbench by a supervisor who thought she was working too slowly. His name was Herr Vogel, and he walked through the factory floor every hour checking production numbers. When someone fell behind, he shoved them, hit them, whatever it took to speed them up. Liesel had been shoved into the workbench more times than she could count. The scars on her back came from her stepfather, who beat her when she was younger. Before the war, before her real father died, her mother had remarried briefly. The marriage lasted less than a year, but the scars lasted forever. Thin, straight lines that would never fully fade. The broken fingers came from a machine accident at the factory in December 1944. Her hand had been caught between 2 metal plates when another worker lost control of a press. The fingers broke with a sound like dry twigs snapping. The factory nurse wrapped them and told her to keep working. They healed crooked because no one set them properly. No one took her to a doctor for any of these injuries. In wartime, Germany especially in the final chaotic year of 1944 and 1945, medical care was reserved for soldiers and essential personnel. A 19-year-old factory girl with a broken bone was told to wrap it and keep working. A factory girl with an infected arm was given a bandage and sent back to her station. The body was just another tool, and tools could be used until they broke completely. Kirby documents every injury with photographs taken with the camp's medical camera, detailed notes about the location, size, and age of each mark. He knows this case will be reviewed by higher command. It might even be used in war crimes documentation, evidence of how the Nazi regime treated its own people in the desperate final months of the war. The pattern of injuries on Liesl Brenner's body tells a story of systematic neglect and abuse, not just by the factory supervisors, not just by Herr Vogel, who shoved her into workbenches, but by an entire system that treated young women as expendable labor, tools to be used up and discarded. Kirby asks Liesl if she knows how bad the infection in her arm has become. She nods, a small movement of her head. She says she thought it would kill her before the war ended. She says part of her wished it would. The words hang in the air of the examination room like smoke. Part of her wished it would. Wished the infection would spread, wished the fever would come, wished for the mercy of death rather than one more day in that factory with a hammer in her hand. Florence and Margaret say nothing. There is nothing to say to that kind of statement, the kind of exhaustion that makes death seem like a relief. Captain Kirby closes his notebook and makes a decision. This girl needs surgery, and she needs it soon, or she will lose the arm. The infection has been progressing for 6 or 7 months. It has eaten through nearly half the radius bone, created pockets of rot and decay that will continue spreading no matter how many bandages are applied. Without surgical intervention, the infection will reach the bloodstream, and once it reaches the bloodstream, it will kill her. He tells Liesl this directly, looking her in the eyes. Your arm is badly infected. If we don't operate soon, you will lose it. And if the infection spreads to your blood, it will kill you. Liesl looks back at him with those blank eyes. She nods once. Then you should operate. No fear, no questions, just acceptance, like this is one more thing happening to her body that she has no control over. Kirby leaves the examination room and walks down the hallway to the administrative wing of the hospital. He needs to speak with Colonel Preston Aldridge, the camp commander, because what he is about to propose is not standard procedure. It is not even close to standard procedure. We are now 2 hours after Liesl's arrival at Camp Upton, and Captain Kirby is in the camp commander's office, explaining why he needs to perform major surgery on a German prisoner of war. Colonel Preston Aldridge is 52 years old, a career military man with grey hair cut short and a face that has forgotten how to smile. His office is sparse, functional, with a desk, 2 chairs and a filing cabinet. On the wall behind him hangs a map of the camp with coloured pins marking the locations of different prisoner barracks. Aldridge listens to Kirby's explanation without interrupting. When Kirby finishes, the colonel leans back in his chair and is silent for a long moment. Then he says, "Resources are limited, Captain." It is not a question. It is a statement of fact. Kirby knows this. Everyone knows this. The war is still ongoing, even if Germany is collapsing. There are still American soldiers fighting and dying in the Pacific. There are still supply lines stretched thin, still medical supplies being rationed, still priorities to consider. Aldridge continues, "She's a prisoner of war, German, enemy combatant. We're supposed to provide basic care, not advanced surgical procedures." Kirby takes a breath. He expected this argument. He prepared for it. The Geneva Conventions require that prisoner of war medical care meet the same standard as care for our own troops, he says. Same standard, sir. Not basic. Same. Aldridge raises an eyebrow. You're going to quote the Geneva Conventions to me? Yes, sir. And more importantly, this is a humanitarian case. She's 19 years old. The infection will kill her if it's not treated. We have the capability to save her life and possibly her arm. The question is whether we choose to use that capability. Aldridge studies Kirby's face. Can you save the arm? Kirby admits the truth. I don't know. The X-rays show extensive bone damage. The infection has been untreated for at least 6 months. It may have spread into the surrounding tissue. Best case scenario, I can remove the infected bone, clean out the wound and pack it with sulfur drugs to stop the infection from spreading further. Worst case scenario, The infection has already reached the bloodstream, in which case amputation may be the only option to save her life. And if you amputate, then she lives, but she loses the arm. She's 19. She'll spend the rest of her life one-handed. Aldridge is quiet again. Outside the office window, prisoners are walking in a line toward the mess hall, their grey uniforms forming a moving column. Guards stand at intervals, rifles slung over their shoulders. "Sir," Kirby says, and something in his voice makes Aldridge look up. "I have a daughter, Sarah. She's 17, home in Boston." Aldridge's expression does not change, but he is listening. "When I look at this girl," Kirby continues, "I see Sarah's age, Sarah's future. If my daughter were in a German camp with an infected arm, I would pray someone would help her. Not because of politics or strategy, because she's 17 and her life should not end in a factory." He pauses. "This girl, Liesel, she's somebody's daughter too. Her father's dead. Her mother's dead. Her brother's missing. But she was someone's daughter once. And I have to believe that matters." Aldridge is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "You're not just asking me to approve a surgery. You're asking me to approve the principle that enemy daughters deserve the same chance as ours." "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm asking." The silence stretches between them. The clock on the wall ticks. Somewhere in the distance, a door slams. Finally, Aldridge speaks. "How long will the surgery take? 3 hours? Maybe 4. And the recovery? Weeks. If the surgery is successful, she'll need to stay in the hospital for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. That's 2 weeks of hospital bed space, 2 weeks of nursing care, 2 weeks of antibiotics and bandages and supervision." "Yes, sir." Aldridge taps his fingers on the desk, a rhythm like a clock ticking. Then he says, "Proceed with the surgery, but I want everything documented, every decision, every resource used, every hour of nursing care. If questions are asked later about why we performed major surgery on an enemy prisoner, I want a complete medical justification on record." Kirby feels something release in his chest. Relief, maybe, or just the absence of the tension that has been building since he first saw Liesel's arm. "Thank you, sir." Aldridge waves a hand, dismissing the thanks. "Don't thank me yet, Captain. Just save the girl's arm if you can, and if you can't, at least save her life." Kirby returns to the hospital and finds Liesel sitting on the examination table exactly where he left her. She has not moved, has not changed position. Florence and Margaret have given her a clean hospital gown to replace the stained shirt, but she still sits with that same blank expression, staring at nothing. He tells her what is going to happen. He explains that they will operate on her arm, try to remove the infected bone and clean out the wound. He explains that the surgery will be painful, that the recovery will take weeks, that there is no guarantee her arm can be saved. Liesel listens without expression. Then she asks a question that catches Kirby off guard. "Will I be sent back to Germany after the surgery?" Kirby tells her honestly that he does not know. The war is almost over, everyone can feel it. Germany is collapsing. Prisoner repatriation is being planned, but the details are still unclear. Where prisoners will go, when they will go, how the process will work, none of that has been decided yet. Liesel nods slowly, processing this information. Then she says something that tells Kirby everything he needs to know about what this girl has survived. "That's good enough. I would rather lose the arm in an American hospital than die of infection in a German factory." The words are delivered in that same flat tone, but the meaning behind them is crystal clear. She has already calculated the odds, already weighed her options. An uncertain future with one arm is better than a certain death with 2. Kirby asks if she has any other questions. She has one. "Will I be awake during the surgery?" He explains that they will use a spinal anesthetic. She will be awake, but she will not feel pain below the shoulder. The camp does not have enough general anesthesia supplies for non-critical cases, and they need to save those supplies for emergencies. Liesel considers this. Then she says, "That's fine. I don't need to be asleep." There is something in the way she says it that makes Kirby think she has been awake for worse things than surgery. That being conscious while someone cuts into her arm is not the worst thing that has happened to her body. He tells her the surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, April 12th, 8 in the morning. She should not eat anything after midnight tonight. Florence and Margaret will prepare her and bring her to the operating room. Liesl nods. Thank you, doctor. It is the first time she has said thank you, the first crack in that blank facade. Just 2 words, but they carry weight. Kirby leaves her with the nurses and walks back to his office. He sits at his desk and looks at the medical file he has started for Liesl Brenner, 19 years old, factory worker, osteomyelitis advanced stage, multiple trauma injuries, malnutrition, possible psychological trauma, and underneath all that clinical language, the real story. A girl who worked herself nearly to death because her family needed ration cards. A girl who stood at a workbench for 12 hours a day with a rotting arm because stopping meant starvation. A girl who thought death might be a mercy. Kirby has performed hundreds of surgeries in his career, removed bullets, repaired shattered bones, amputated limbs destroyed beyond saving. But somehow this case feels different. This surgery is not just about saving an arm. It is about proving that mercy still exists even in the machinery of war. That a girl who was treated as disposable by her own government might be treated as human by her captors. He does not know if the surgery will work. He does not know if the infection has already spread too far. But he knows he has to try. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock he will make the first incision. And whatever happens after that, at least they will have tried to save something that everyone else had written off as already lost. The operating room at Camp Upton is not really an operating room at all. It is a converted storage space at the end of the hospital building, repurposed when the camp began handling more serious medical cases last year. The walls are painted white, scrubbed clean, but you can still see the outline of shelves that used to hold supplies. The surgical table sits in the center under 2 overhead lights that buzz faintly, a sound like trapped insects. It is 8 o'clock in the morning on April 12, 1945. Outside, the spring sun is already warming the camp, burning off the morning fog that settles in the low areas between the barracks. Inside the operating room, the air is cool and sterile, heavy with the smell of disinfectant and something else underneath it. Anticipation, maybe, or dread. Captain Edmund Kirby stands at the scrub sink washing his hands for the 3rd time. The water runs hot over his knuckles and he counts silently as he scrubs. 30 seconds for each hand between each finger under each nail. The routine is automatic muscle memory from 1,000 surgeries before this one. He has recruited a second doctor to assist a civilian surgeon named Dr. Philip Warren from the hospital in the nearby town. Warren is older, maybe 55, with steady hands and a reputation for staying calm when things go wrong. Kirby has worked with him twice before on complicated cases. Warren does not ask unnecessary questions. The 2 surgical nurses are Florence and Margaret, the same women who have been caring for Liesl since she arrived. They prepared the operating room last night, sterilizing every instrument twice, laying out the tools in precise order on the metal tray: scalpels, forceps, bone saws, irrigation syringes, sutures, drainage tubes, everything Kirby might need and several things he hopes he will not. Liesl is brought in at exactly 8 o'clock, wheeled on a gurney by an orderly who leaves quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. She wears a thin hospital gown, her left arm freshly bandaged from last night's cleaning and preparation. Her face is still blank, still showing nothing. Florence helps her move from the gurney to the surgical table. The table is hard, unpadded except for a thin sheet. Liesl positions herself without being told, lying flat on her back, her left arm extended to the side on a support board. Kirby approaches and explains what is about to happen one more time. He has learned that patients do better when they understand the process, even if they are afraid. "We're going to give you a spinal anesthetic," he says. "You'll feel a pinch in your back, and then you won't feel anything from the chest down. You'll be awake during the surgery. You'll feel pressure, but not pain. If anything hurts you, tell me immediately." Liesl nods. "I understand. You can look away if you want. Look at the ceiling. Some people prefer not to watch." "I want to watch," she says. Kirby pauses. Most patients do not want to watch their own surgery. But there is something in Liesel's voice, a determination that he recognizes. She has spent months with no control over what happens to her body. This is her taking back what little control she can. "All right," he says, "but if it becomes too much, just close your eyes." Dr. Warren administers the spinal anesthetic with practiced efficiency. Liesel sits up, curved forward, while he finds the space between her vertebrae and inserts the needle. She does not flinch, does not make a sound. Within minutes, the numbness spreads down from her chest, and her legs go heavy and useless. They lay her back down. Margaret straps her right arm gently to the table, not to restrain her, but to keep her steady. Her left arm is positioned carefully on the support board, elevated slightly, the swollen forearm exposed under the bright lights. Kirby takes his position on the left side of the table. Warren stands across from him. Florence stands ready with instruments. Margaret monitors Liesel's vital signs, her fingers on the girl's wrist counting the pulse. Kirby picks up the scalpel. The blade catches the light, a thin line of silver. He looks at Liesel's face one more time. Her eyes are open, watching him. "I'm going to start now," he says. She nods. He makes the first incision. The skin parts cleanly under the blade, a straight line running along the length of the forearm, following the path of the radius bone underneath. Blood wells up immediately, but not as much as Kirby expected. The tissue underneath is starved of healthy circulation, the infection having choked off some of the blood supply. Underneath the skin, the muscle is wrong. It should be red, healthy, full of blood and life. Instead, it is streaked with yellow and grey, discolored like meat that has started to turn. The infection has spread into the soft tissue, eating away at everything it touches. The smell hits them all at once, sweet and rotten, thick enough to taste. Florence takes a half step back, her hand going to her mouth. Margaret's eyes water, but she stays focused on Liesel's pulse. Warren's jaw tightens, but he says nothing. Liesel, watching from the table, sees the expressions on their faces. "It's bad," she says. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," Kirby says. He has learned not to lie to patients. "It's bad, but we knew it would be." He uses forceps to pull back the muscle, exposing the bone underneath. The radius bone should be white and solid, protected by healthy tissue. Instead, what he sees makes his stomach turn. The bone is crumbling, literally crumbling like chalk or rotten wood. When he touches it gently, with a probe, small fragments break away and float in the infected fluid that fills the wound. The cortex, the hard outer shell of the bone, is gone in places. Just gone, eaten away by months of infection until there is nothing left but diseased marrow and pockets of pus. Warren lets out a slow breath. Jesus. Kirby says nothing. He is already calculating, already revising his surgical plan. He had hoped to remove maybe 2 inches of infected bone, maybe 3. But looking at this, he knows it is worse than the X-rays showed, much worse. He begins the debridement, the process of cutting away all the dead and infected tissue. It is slow, meticulous work. Every piece of diseased bone has to come out, every bit of infected muscle has to be removed, or the infection will just come back. He removes 1 inch of radius, then 2, then 3. The bone comes out in pieces, fragments that have lost all structural integrity. Some pieces are so soft they crumble between the forceps. Others are hard but brittle, breaking with the slightest pressure. At 4 inches, Kirby pauses. He looks at what is left. The radius bone now has a gap in the middle, a space where 4 inches of bone used to be. The 2 ends, the parts still attached to the wrist and the elbow, are barely holding on. If he removes any more, there will be nothing left to support the structure of the arm. Warren sees the problem immediately. "Can you stop there?" Kirby examines the edges of the remaining bone, looking for signs of infection. The bone at both ends looks healthier, more solid. Not perfect, but better than what he just removed. "I think so," he says. "I think we got it all." But he knows he is not certain. He cannot be certain. Bone infections hide. They burrow deep. There could be pockets of bacteria still lurking in the remaining bone, waiting to spread again once the surgery is over. He irrigates the wound with saline solution, flushing out the debris and the infected fluid. The liquid that comes out is cloudy, yellow-tinged. He irrigates again and again until the fluid runs clear. Then he packs the wound with sulfur powder, one of the earliest antibiotics. The white powder fills the gap where the bone used to be, a last defense against infection. It is not perfect. It is not even close to perfect. But it is the best they have. The wound is now a gaping trench in Liesel's arm, running from just above her wrist to just below her elbow. The muscle has been cut away, the bone removed, leaving tendons and blood vessels exposed like wires in a cut cable. It looks like something from a battlefield, not an operating room. Kirby cannot close the wound completely. If he stitches it shut, the infection will have nowhere to drain. It will build up inside, creating an abscess, and everything they just did will be for nothing. Instead, he stitches the skin loosely, leaving gaps, and places 2 drainage tubes into the wound. The tubes will carry away any fluid that builds up, keeping the wound open and draining. The whole process takes 3 hours. 3 hours of cutting and cleaning and irrigating and packing. When it is finally done, Liesel's arm is wrapped in thick white bandages, the drainage tubes emerging from the dressing like the legs of some pale insect. Kirby steps back from the table. His gown is stained with blood and fluid, his hands cramping from holding instruments for so long. Warren is quiet, staring at the wrapped arm with an expression that might be satisfaction or might be concern. It is hard to tell. Margaret checks Liesel's vital signs one more time. Pulse steady, blood pressure stable. The girl has not moved during the entire surgery, has not made a sound except for her breathing. Kirby looks at Liesel's face. She is still awake, still watching. "It's done," he says. "We removed the infected bone, about 4 inches. I packed the wound with medicine to fight the infection. Now we wait and see if it works." Liesel blinks slowly. Then she asks the question that matters most to her. "Can I move my fingers?" Kirby had not asked her to try yet. He had been afraid of what the answer might be. If the nerves were damaged during the infection, if the surgery had cut something critical, her hand might be paralyzed. "Try," he says. They all watch her right hand, the one strapped to the table. Nothing happens. Then Kirby realizes she is trying to move her left hand, the one they just operated on. He looks at her fingers, the ones extending from the bandages. For a moment, nothing. Then slowly, the fingers twitch. A small movement, barely visible, but movement. Kirby feels something release in his chest. If the fingers move, the nerves are intact. If the nerves are intact, there is a chance. A real chance that the arm can be saved. "Nerves are good," he says, and he allows himself a small moment of hope. They move Liesel to a recovery bed in the hospital ward. She is still awake, the spinal anesthetic keeping her conscious but numb from the chest down. The numbness will wear off in a few hours, and then the pain will come. Kirby has morphine ready for when that happens. The recovery ward has 20 beds, all occupied by German prisoners with various injuries and illnesses. Broken bones, pneumonia, infected wounds from combat malnutrition. The male prisoners watch as Liesel is wheeled in their faces, showing curiosity and something else. Suspicion, maybe. Resentment. A 19-year-old girl receiving major surgery while they get basic care. Special treatment. Preferential treatment. The whispers start almost immediately. Florence and Margaret position Liesel's bed near the window where the morning sun can reach her. They elevate her left arm on pillows, keeping it above the level of her heart to reduce swelling. The drainage tubes hang off the side of the bed, dripping slowly into collection bottles. 2 hours after the surgery, Liesel wakes fully from the spinal anesthetic. The numbness fades and the pain arrives like a visitor that has been waiting at the door. It is not the sharp pain of a fresh injury. It is deeper, duller, a throbbing ache that pulses with her heartbeat. Her arm feels like it is being crushed and burned at the same time, like something alive and angry is trying to claw its way out of the bandages. Margaret sees her face change, sees the pain break through the blank expression for the first time. She administers morphine immediately, a small dose injected into Liesel's right arm. The pain does not disappear, but it softens, becomes manageable. Liesel lies very still, staring at the ceiling. She does not cry. She does not complain. She just breathes slow and steady, counting each breath like she is counting the seconds until the pain ends. 1 week after the surgery, Liesel is still in the hospital ward. The infection has not spread, which is the first good sign. Her temperature, which had been slightly elevated before the surgery, has dropped to near normal. The fever is gone, which means the body is not fighting a systemic infection. The drainage tubes are pulling thick yellow fluid from the wound, which means the infection is being flushed out. Every day, Captain Kirby changes the dressings, unwrapping the bandages carefully, inspecting the wound for signs of necrosis or sepsis. So far, the tissue is healing cleanly. The edges of the wound are pink, not black. New tissue is growing, filling in the gaps. The sulfur powder is working. But the recovery is not just physical. Liesel is withdrawn even more than before. She speaks only when spoken to, answering questions in short sentences. She stares at the ceiling for hours at a time, her face blank, her mind somewhere far away. The other patients in the ward avoid her. The male German prisoners whisper among themselves theories and accusations. She must be a collaborator, they say, a spy. Why else would the Americans give her such good treatment? Why else would they waste surgery and medicine on a factory girl? Some of them say it louder when they think she cannot hear. Or maybe they want her to hear. Maybe they want her to know that even here, even among her own countrymen, she is not welcome. Liesel ignores them. She has learned to ignore many things. Florence and Margaret notice. They make it a point to spend extra time with her, bringing small comforts. A second pillow for her head. A German book borrowed from the camp library, a collection of Grimm's fairy tales. A radio tuned to music stations, classical pieces that fill the ward with something other than whispers and coughs. Slowly, over the course of the second week, Liesel begins to talk. It starts small. Florence asks her how the pain is, and Liesel answers with more than 2 words. Margaret asks if she slept well, and Liesel actually responds with a sentence. Then gradually the stories come out. Not all at once, not in any organized way. Just fragments, pieces of her life that she has been carrying alone for too long. She tells them about her father, Joseph. He had been a factory worker before the war, before he was conscripted and sent to the Eastern Front. He wrote letters home for the first year, short messages about the weather and the food, and how much he missed them. Then the letters stopped. 3 months later, the telegram came. Killed in action. No details. No grave, just gone. She tells them about her mother, Helene, a quiet woman who coughed through the winters and grew thinner every year. The pneumonia took her in January 1945, during one of the coldest weeks of the war. Liesel had been at the factory when it happened. She came home to find her mother cold and still covered with a thin blanket that had not been enough to keep her warm. She tells them about her brother Franz. 15 years old when they conscripted him into the Volkssturm, the last desperate militia formed from boys and old men. They gave him a rifle too big for his shoulders and sent him to defend a bridge somewhere in the Ruhr. Liesel never saw him again. She does not know if he is alive or dead. She does not know if she will ever know. She tells them about the factory, about the other girls who worked there, some as young as 15, about the air raids when they would huddle in the basement shelter and listen to the bombs falling, the building shaking around them like it was trying to tear itself apart. About the mornings after, when they would emerge to find whole streets gone, just rubble and smoke where buildings used to be. "I thought the war would never end," she says one afternoon, her voice quiet. "I thought I would die in that factory with a hammer in my hand." Margaret, changing her bandages, pauses. "But you didn't." "No," Liesel says, "I didn't." On the morning of the 14th day after surgery, Florence brings Liesel breakfast. The tray holds more than the standard hospital meal. Real scrambled eggs, cooked fluffy and yellow with actual butter. 3 strips of bacon, crispy and dark. Fresh white bread, not the dense military ration bread. A small glass of orange juice. Liesel stares at the tray like it is something from another world. She has not seen food like this since before the war. Since before her father died, before the ration cards and the factory and the long, slow descent into hunger that defined the last years in Germany. The last meal she remembers like this was in 1942, her 16th birthday, when her mother had saved enough to buy real eggs and a small piece of ham. The smell hits her first. Salt and smoke from the bacon, richness from the eggs, the yeasty sweetness of fresh bread. It is overwhelming, like being hit with a wave of memory and loss all at once. Florence sets the tray on the small table beside the bed. You need to eat. You need strength to heal. Liesel's hands are shaking slightly as she picks up the fork. She cannot remember the last time her hands shook from something other than pain or cold or exhaustion. This is different. This is anticipation mixed with something else. Confusion, maybe, or fear that the food will disappear if she reaches for it. She takes a piece of bacon first, brings it to her mouth slowly like she is approaching something that might bite back. The first taste is salt, pure, overwhelming salt that she has not had in years. Wartime rations had no salt or almost none. Everything tasted like paste, like wet cardboard, like nothing. But this bacon tastes like salt and smoke and fat, real rendered fat that melts on her tongue. The texture is crispy on the outside, tender in the middle. She chews slowly, and the flavors spread through her mouth. Smoke and meat, and a subtle sweetness from the caramelization. It coats her throat as she swallows, warm and rich like silk made of food. She takes another bite, then another. Each bite is the same explosion of flavor, the same overwhelming richness. Margaret, checking her vital signs, watches quietly. She sees Liesel's face change, sees something crack in that blank expression. The girl's eyes are wet, though no tears fall. Liesel tries the eggs next, scrambled with real butter, fluffy and soft. The yolk is rich and creamy, mixing with the salt from the bacon still on her tongue. It is warm and substantial, real protein that her body has been starving for. She remembers her mother's last meal. Bark soup. Actual bark from trees boiled in water until it was soft enough to swallow. One mouldy potato split between the three of them. That was January. That was 3 months ago. That was the last meal her mother ever ate. And now Liesel is sitting in an enemy prison camp, eating bacon and eggs like it is a normal morning. Like the war never happened. Like her mother did not die eating tree bark while Liesel was at the factory hammering metal fittings. Her hands tremble harder. She sets down the fork. Margaret sits down in the chair beside the bed. When was the last time you had real eggs? Liesel's voice comes out smaller than she intends. Before the war. Before my father died. 3 years. 3 years of watery soup and sawdust bread and whatever scraps could be found. 3 years of hunger so constant it became normal, became part of the background of existence like breathing or sleeping. My mother died eating bark soup, Liesel says, and now the tears do come silent and unexpected. My brother was given mouldy bread before they sent him to fight, and I'm sitting here eating bacon. The words hang in the air. The guilt is palpable, heavy enough to touch. Florence, standing nearby, speaks gently. Your mother would want you to eat. Your brother would want you to heal. But Liesel shakes her head. You don't understand. They're dead, or dying, or starving. And I'm here, safe, fed. Why? It is the question that has been building in her for 2 weeks. Why is she being treated well? Why did the American doctor spend 3 hours saving her arm? Why are the nurses kind to her? Why is she being given bacon and eggs when her own people left her to rot? Margaret's answer is simple. Because you're a girl who's been hurt enough, and because if our daughters were in your place, we'd want someone to care. The statement is so plain, so matter-of-fact, that it cuts through everything else. Not because of politics, not because of strategy, not because of some larger plan, just because a girl has been hurt enough, and maybe it is time for that to stop, and because somewhere other people have daughters too. Liesel picks up the fork again, finishes the eggs, finishes the bacon, eats the bread, slowly savoring the texture of real wheat and real butter, drinks the orange juice, sweet and acidic and alive. When she is done, she feels full for the first time in years. Physically full, her stomach distended slightly from having actual food in it. But also something else. A small crack in the wall she has built around herself. A tiny opening where something like hope might eventually grow. 3 weeks after the surgery, Captain Kirby is writing his final medical report on Liesl Brenner's case. He sits at his desk in his small office surrounded by files and medical journals and the accumulated paperwork of running a prison camp hospital. The report is thorough. Detailed surgical notes, daily observations, photographs of the wound at various stages of healing, blood test results showing the infection markers dropping day by day. Everything documented, everything recorded, everything justified. But as he writes, Kirby finds himself thinking beyond the medical details. He is thinking about what this case means in the larger context of the war of history, of what they are all part of. By the end of World War II, more than 11 million people worked as forced laborers in Nazi Germany. Women, teenagers, prisoners of war, conscripted civilians. They were assigned to factories, farms, construction sites, mines. The conditions were brutal. Medical care was minimal or non-existent. People died from exhaustion, from malnutrition, from untreated injuries that would have been simple to fix in peacetime. Liesl Brenner is one case among millions. One girl among countless others who were used up and discarded by a system that treated human beings as machinery. Kirby notes in his report that osteomyelitis has a mortality rate of 30 to 40% if left untreated in wartime conditions. The fact that Liesl survived for 6 months with an active bone infection is evidence of either extraordinary physical resilience or blind luck. Probably both. He also notes the pattern of injuries beyond the bone infection, the broken fingers that healed crooked, the rib bruises from being shoved into workbenches, the scars on her back from earlier abuse. This is not just a medical case, this is a catalogue of systematic violence. The report takes him most of the afternoon to complete. When he is done, he adds one final note, a personal observation that is not strictly medical but feels necessary to include. Patient has shown remarkable resilience throughout treatment and recovery. Despite extensive trauma, both physical and likely psychological, patient remains cooperative and stoic. Recommend continued monitoring for signs of post-traumatic stress. Recommend priority consideration for any future humanitarian programs. He does not know if anyone will read that note. He does not know if it will make any difference. But he writes it anyway because someone should be on record saying that this girl deserves more than she has been given. He thinks about his daughter Sarah, safe in Boston, 17 years old, and complaining about rationed sugar and cancelled dances. He wonders what kind of world he is building for her, whether she will grow up understanding what was sacrificed, what was saved, what was lost. The war in Europe ends on May 8, 1945. The announcement comes over the radio in the hospital ward at 2 in the afternoon. A crackling voice reading the official statement of Germany's unconditional surrender. The male German prisoners listen in silence, their faces showing nothing. No relief, no grief. Just the blank acceptance of men who have already known for months that this day was coming. Liesl listens from her bed near the window. She is sitting up now, her left arm still bandaged but healing. The drainage tubes were removed 3 days ago. The wound is closing slowly, the edges knitting together under fresh dressings that Florence changes every morning. When the announcement ends, the ward is quiet. Someone coughs. Someone else turns over in their bed. Life continues exactly as it did 5 minutes before, because for prisoners the war ending changes nothing immediate. They are still here, still behind fences, still waiting. But for Liesl, the announcement brings a question that has been building in the back of her mind for weeks. If the war is over, what happens next? Where do prisoners go when there is no more war to be prisoner of? She does not have to wait long for the answer. 2 weeks after Germany's surrender, Colonel Aldridge announces the repatriation plan. All German prisoners of war will be processed and returned to Germany over the coming months. The process will be organized, controlled, handled through official channels. There will be documentation, medical clearances, transportation arranged through the Red Cross. Everyone will go home. The announcement is posted on a bulletin board in each barracks. The male prisoners read it with mixed reactions. Some want to go home desperate to see what is left of their families, their cities, their lives. Others dread it, knowing they are returning to a country that has been bombed into rubble, occupied by foreign armies, stripped of everything that made it familiar. Liesel reads the announcement with Florence standing beside her. She has been allowed to walk around the hospital, now short trips from her bed to the bathroom and back. Her arm is still weak, the muscles atrophied from weeks of disuse, but she can move it. She can grip things lightly. The fingers work. Florence sees her face change as she reads. "What's wrong?" Liesel stares at the paper. "I don't want to go back." The words come out flat, matter of fact, like she is stating an obvious truth. The sky is blue. Water is wet. "I don't want to go back to Germany." Florence understands immediately. "You have no family left. No family, no home. My apartment in Essen was destroyed in an air raid last year. Everything I owned was in that apartment. My mother's photographs, my father's letters, my brother's school books. All gone." She turns away from the bulletin board. "If I go back to Germany, they'll release me into a country I don't recognize anymore. No family to take me in. No job because the factories are destroyed. No place to live because the buildings are rubble. I'll be alone in a graveyard." Florence is quiet for a moment. Then she asks the question that matters. "What do you want instead?" Liesel looks at her left arm, still wrapped in bandages. "Is there any way I can stay here in America?" The question is asked carefully, tentatively, like she is testing whether the words are even allowed to be spoken. Can a German prisoner of war ask to stay in the country that defeated her? Is that even possible? Florence does not know the answer. "I'll ask Dr. Kirby." That afternoon, Captain Kirby brings the question to Colonel Aldridge. The colonel's office is exactly as it was 6 weeks ago when Kirby first asked permission to operate. The same sparse furniture, the same map on the wall, on the B. The same pins marking barracks locations. Kirby explains Liesel's situation. No family, no home, no future in a destroyed country. She is asking if there is any way to stay in the United States to not be repatriated with the other prisoners. Aldridge listens without interrupting. When Kirby finishes, the colonel leans back in his chair and is quiet for a long time. "This is complicated," he finally says. "I know, sir. She's a German national, technically an enemy combatant, even if she never fired a weapon. The standard procedure is to repatriate all prisoners to their home countries as quickly as possible. That's what the agreements say. But there are exceptions," Kirby says. "Displaced persons programs, refugee status, special cases." Aldridge nods slowly. "There are. But those programs are being set up for specific categories of people. Jews fleeing persecution, political dissidents, scientists and intellectuals whose skills we want. A 19-year-old factory girl doesn't fit any of those categories. She fits the category of someone who was abused by her own government and has nowhere else to go." Aldridge looks at Kirby. "You're personally invested in this case?" It is not a question. It is an observation. Kirby does not deny it. "Yes, sir. I spent 3 hours trying to save that girl's arm. I'd like to think there's more of a future for her than being dumped in the ruins of Essen with nothing. When I think about what might happen to her there, I think about my daughter Sarah. What I'd want for her if our positions were reversed." The colonel is quiet again. Then he says, "I can forward the request up the chain. State Department, Immigration, maybe even higher. But I can't make any promises. This is above my authority. And even if they approve it, the process will take time. Months, possibly years. What happens to her in the meantime? She'll have to be transferred. We can't keep her here indefinitely. There's a civilian internment camp in Pennsylvania that handles cases like this. German nationals awaiting final disposition. She'd be transferred there while her application is processed." Kirby considers this. Pennsylvania. A civilian camp. Not a prison, but not freedom either. A waiting room between one life and whatever comes next. "Can I tell her that's an option?" "You can tell her we'll try, but make sure she understands there are no guarantees. She might end up on a ship back to Germany anyway. Kirby returns to the hospital and finds Liesel in her bed staring out the window. The spring afternoon is warm, and the window is open slightly, letting in fresh air and the distant sounds of the camp. Men's voices, a truck engine, birdsong from the trees beyond the fence. He sits in the chair beside her bed. "I spoke with Colonel Aldridge about your request." Liesel turns to look at him, and for the first time since she arrived, there is something in her eyes besides blankness. Not hope, exactly, but attention, focus. "You can apply for refugee status," Kirby says. "There are programs being set up for displaced persons who can't safely return to their home countries. But it's complicated. The process takes time, months, maybe longer, and there are no guarantees. What happens while I wait? You'd be transferred to a civilian internment camp in Pennsylvania. It's not a prison, more like a holding facility for people in situations like yours. You'd stay there while your application is processed." Liesel absorbs this information. "And if they deny the application," Kirby tells her the truth, "then you'd be repatriated to Germany with the others." She nods slowly. "Pennsylvania is better than a factory in Essen, and even a small chance of staying is better than no chance at all." There is something almost pragmatic in the way she says it, not emotional, not desperate, just calculating the odds and choosing the option with the least bad outcome. "There's something else I need to do," Kirby says. "I need to prepare a medical file for you to take with you, documentation of your treatment, your surgery, your recovery, and I'm going to write a letter recommending that you be given priority consideration for refugee status." "Why would you do that?" The question catches him off guard. "Because you deserve it." "I'm just a factory worker. I'm nobody." Kirby leans forward. "You're a 19-year-old girl who survived 6 months with a bone infection that should have killed you. Who kept working when your body was falling apart because your family needed food. Who endured systematic abuse and neglect and still got up every morning. That's not nobody. That's someone who deserves a chance." Liesel looks at him for a long moment. Then she says quietly, "Thank you, Doctor." It is the second time she has thanked him. And like the first time, the words carry weight far beyond their simple meaning. Over the next 3 weeks, Kirby prepares the most thorough medical file of his career. X-rays showing the bone damage before and after surgery. Photographs documenting every stage of healing. Detailed surgical notes, daily observations, blood test results. Everything organized, labeled, cross-referenced. And then he writes the letter. It takes him 3 drafts to get it right. To whom it may concern. I am writing to recommend priority consideration for refugee status for Miss Liesel Brenner, a 19-year-old German national currently in American custody at Camp Upton, New York. Miss Brenner was admitted to our facility in April 1945 with advanced osteomyelitis of the left radius, the result of untreated trauma sustained during forced labor at a munitions factory in Essen, Germany. The infection had progressed over 6 to 7 months without medical intervention, resulting in extensive bone necrosis. On April 12, 1945, I performed surgery to remove 4 inches of infected bone and debride the surrounding tissue. The surgery was successful, and Miss Brenner has made a remarkable recovery. However, the medical details are only part of her story. The pattern of injuries documented in her case file, untreated fractures, evidence of workplace violence, signs of long-term malnutrition and abuse, tell the story of systematic neglect by the Nazi labor system. Miss Brenner represents exactly the kind of victim that our humanitarian efforts should prioritize. She has no surviving family. Her father was killed on the Eastern Front. Her mother died of pneumonia during the winter of 1944 to 45. Her brother is missing and presumed dead. Her home in Essen was destroyed. She has nothing to return to in Germany except the ruins of a system that treated her as expendable. I believe Miss Brenner deserves the opportunity to rebuild her life in a country that will treat her as a human being rather than a tool to be used and discarded. I recommend she be given priority consideration for refugee status and resettlement assistance. Respectfully, Captain Edmund Kirby, M.D. Camp Upton, New York. He reads the letter one more time, then signs it and adds it to Liesel's file. He does not know if anyone will read it. He does not know if it will make any difference. But he has done what he can. Early June, 1945. The morning Liesel is scheduled to transfer to Pennsylvania is warm and clear, the kind of spring day that makes you forget winter ever existed. She has been given a clean dress to replace the Wehrmacht uniform. She arrived in a simple blue cotton dress donated by one of the civilian volunteers. It fits reasonably well, though it is a bit loose in the shoulders. Her left arm is strong enough now for travel. The wound has closed completely, leaving a long scar running from wrist to elbow. The arm is weak, the muscles still rebuilding, but she can move it, can use it for light tasks. Kirby has fitted her with a brace to protect the healing bone, a metal and leather contraption that runs along the forearm and straps around her wrist and elbow. Florence and Margaret help her pack the few belongings she has accumulated. The German fairy tale book. A sweater one of the nurses knitted for her during her recovery. A bar of soap. Small things, but they are hers. Margaret hands her a package wrapped in brown paper. This is from all of us. Liesel opens it carefully. Inside is a photograph. The entire hospital staff, doctors and nurses and orderlies standing in front of the building. They must have taken it yesterday without telling her. Captain Kirby stands in the center, his white coat bright in the sun. Florence and Margaret on either side. Everyone looking at the camera with various expressions. Some smiling, some serious. All present. Liesel holds the photograph for a long time, staring at the faces. These are the people who saved her life. Not just her arm, her life. When her own country had written her off as disposable, these strangers had chosen to see her as worth saving. She tucks the photograph carefully into her bag. Thank you. Her voice is steady, but her eyes are wet. She has not cried much during her time at Camp Upton, but this is different. This is gratitude so large it cannot be contained. Captain Kirby walks with her to the transport truck. He carries her medical file in a leather case thick with documentation. This goes with you, he says, handing it to her. Everything about your treatment, your surgery notes, x-rays, the letter I wrote, keep it safe. You'll need it for your application. Liesel takes the case. It is heavy, substantial. The weight of 3 months of care condensed into paper and film. I don't know how to thank you, she says. Kirby shakes his head. You don't have to. Just heal. Just live. That's thanks enough. She climbs into the back of the transport truck. There are 3 other German nationals already inside, all civilians awaiting resettlement decisions. They eye her curiously but say nothing. The truck engine starts. Kirby watches from the hospital steps as the vehicle pulls away, heading toward the camp gate and the road beyond. He watches until the truck disappears from view, carrying Liesel Brenner toward an uncertain future. He stands there for a moment longer, then returns to the hospital. There are other patients waiting, other cases to document. Life continues. But he knows he will remember Liesel Brenner for the rest of his life. Years later, when he writes his memoirs after retiring from medicine, he will devote an entire chapter to her case. He will call it one of the most challenging and heartbreaking surgeries he performed during the war. He will wonder what happened to her, whether she made it to America or was sent back to Germany, whether she found peace or just more struggle, whether somewhere she built the life his daughter Sarah takes for granted, a life of safety, of choices of mornings, without fear. He will have questions that will never be answered. The historical record on Liesel Brenner becomes sparse after her transfer from Camp Upton. The civilian internment camp in Pennsylvania kept poor records, and many of those records were lost or destroyed in the decades that followed. What we know is this: thousands of German nationals, including former prisoners of war, were held in camps across the United States while the government decided what to do with them. Some were repatriated to Germany over the following months and years. Others were allowed to stay, eventually becoming American citizens. A few simply disappeared into the bureaucratic chaos of the post-war period, their fates unknown. Liesel's case was complicated by her medical history. She could not return to manual labor, which made her less useful for the reconstruction efforts in Germany. But her refugee application was also not a high priority. She was not Jewish fleeing persecution. She was not a political dissident with valuable information. She was not a scientist or engineer whose skills the Allies wanted to recruit. She fell into a bureaucratic grey zone, neither urgent nor expendable, just one more case file among thousands. The best guess, based on similar cases from the same period, is that Liesel spent at least a year in the Pennsylvania camp before being released. Possibly with the help of a church sponsorship program, one of the organizations that help displaced persons find housing and work in American cities. But we cannot be certain. The records are incomplete. The trail goes cold, except for one thing. In December 1947, 2.5 years after the surgery at Camp Upton, a letter arrives at the hospital in Boston where Captain Kirby has taken a position after the war. The envelope is addressed to him in careful handwriting, the letters precise, but showing the slight irregularities of someone writing in a second language. Inside is a single page. Dear Dr. Kirby, I hope this letter finds you well. I do not know if you will remember me. My name is Liesel Brenner. You operated on my arm at Camp Upton in April 1945. I wanted to write to thank you for saving my arm. The doctors here say it has healed remarkably well considering how bad the infection was. I still cannot lift heavy things and the arm tires easily, but I can use it. I can work. I am now working as a seamstress in a small town in upstate New York, not far from where the camp once stood. The work is gentle on my arm. Needles are lighter than hammers. I am learning to sew dresses, mend shirts, alter coats. It is quiet work, good work. I think about the hospital sometimes, about Nurse Florence and Nurse Margaret, about the breakfast with the bacon and the eggs, about how kind everyone was, even though I was supposed to be the enemy. I do not ask for anything. I only wanted you to know that the arm you saved has been useful, that I am alive and working and trying to build a life here. Thank you, Dr. Kirby. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a prisoner. With gratitude, L.B. The letter is signed only with initials. No return address. No indication of exactly where in upstate New York she is living or what town she is working in. Kirby reads the letter 3 times. Then he sits at his desk for a long time, holding the paper, staring at those careful letters. He thinks about responding, about trying to find her, to check on her recovery, to see if she needs anything. But something stops him. Maybe it is the lack of a return address which feels intentional. Maybe it is the tone of the letter which sounds like closure rather than an opening. Maybe it is just respect for the life she is trying to build, a life that might not benefit from being connected to a past she is trying to move beyond. He keeps the letter in his personal files. For the rest of his life he will take it out occasionally and read it again, wondering, hoping, never quite knowing. What happened to Liesel Brenner? Did she stay in that small town in upstate New York sewing dresses and living quietly? Did she eventually marry? Have children, build a family to replace the one she lost? Did she become an American citizen? Swear allegiance to the country that had once been her enemy? Did she find peace, or did she struggle? Did the wounds, both physical and psychological, prove too much? Did she eventually return to Germany after all, unable to build a new life in a foreign country? Did she spend her days haunted by memories of factories and infections and everything she had lost? We do not know. The historical record is silent. The letter from 1947 is the last confirmed trace of her existence. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the lesson is that some stories do not have neat endings. They have interruptions, pauses, ellipses that trail off into uncertainty. The war ended in 1945, but its consequences echoed for decades. Some of those echoes are still audible today, in the stories that get told and retold, in the archives that get opened and closed, in the questions that never quite get answered. Liesel Brenner was one person among millions, one factory girl among countless others who were used and discarded by a system that treated human beings as machinery. Her story is not unique, but it is hers. And for a brief moment in the spring of 1945, in a camp hospital in upstate New York, someone decided that her story mattered enough to try to save it. Captain Edmund Kirby, sitting at his desk in Boston in December 1947, holding a letter signed with two initials, allows himself to believe that the effort was worth it. That somewhere in upstate New York, a girl who once thought she would die in a factory is instead sitting at a sewing machine making dresses living. It is not a Hollywood ending. It is not triumph or redemption or any of the neat narrative arcs we like to impose on history. It is just survival. Quiet, unremarkable survival. But sometimes that is enough. Sometimes survival is the victory. Kirby folds the letter carefully and places it back in his file. He does not respond. He does not search for her. He lets her have her new life, whatever form that life has taken. And he returns to his work, treating other patients, performing other surgeries, living his own life in the shadow of a war that ended but never quite finished. Years later in his memoirs, he will write about Liesel's case. About the arm that would not die, even when everything around it was dying. About the girl who survived 6 months with an infection that should have killed her. About the choice to save one person when the world was full of people who could not be saved. He will end the chapter with a question he cannot answer, a question that perhaps has no answer. What does it mean to save one life in a war that destroyed millions? He does not know. But he knows he had to try. And somewhere, maybe a girl named Liesel is sewing a dress, her left arm moving carefully but moving, and that is enough. That has to be enough. The story ends there in uncertainty and hope, and the quiet determination to believe that small acts of mercy matter even when the larger world suggests they do not. Somewhere in the archives, a medical file sits in a box, X-rays and surgical notes and photographs of a healing wound. A record of what happened to one girl's arm in the spring of 1945. And somewhere, maybe in a small town whose name we do not know, an old photograph sits in a drawer. A group of people in white coats standing in front of a hospital building looking at the camera present for a moment that someone thought was worth preserving. That is where the story ends. Not in certainty, in possibility, in the space between what we know and what we hope, in the arm that would not die, and the girl who learned to live with it.